The key to doing this is to let your ego and your fears and everything else that you probably define as yourself go. You have to just open yourself to the information with no expectations. And most people will get something if they do that. If they just kind of open their minds, and then they have to have an intent of what it is they want to see. Now, there's a lot of issues here that make it difficult. Okay, even though it's not really a difficult thing to do, it's an easy thing to get in the way and to mess up. You know, it's not hard to do it, but it's easy to cloud the result. So one of the things that is important is that your intent has to be clear. If you have an intent that says, I'd just like to see what was going on at this site back when, you know, the stones were being put into place, or back when this piece of jewelry was made, and then you just will see just that. Now, if your intent is just to see it right around that place, or maybe the process of the jewelry being made, then that's all you'll see. You'll see maybe an oven where the jewelry was being bent or heated, where the metal was being twisted, where the stone was being put in. You might just see that, and that's all you see. So you may just see a picture of a couple of hands, a glowing fire, and some things going on. You know, very non-specific. It's not like you're backing up to a big picture of what the times were like, and you know what the person was making it was like, and what was his life. You didn't ask any of that. You see, all you asked is a very specific question. That's all the data you will get. So first of all, you have to realize that you're querying a database. If you query it with a very specific, you know, request, you get a very specific result. If you query it with a very general query, you'll get tons and tons of stuff that might fit that query, but it may not, you know, it may not be what you want. So that's kind of a catch-22 where you are. You're very, very specific. You'd like to see kind of more of the borders around that. You have to explore it. You can't just get it all necessarily easy in one look. So the first thing is you have to get good at querying. So you look at a specific thing, and then you maybe query the database a little more. Okay, here's that piece of jewelry being made. Here's that rock being put into place. Now, who was it that put that in? You know, let me see something of the individual that's working on that jewelry, or just put that rock in place. Or let me see an idea of the group of individuals, the society, the culture that's doing this. Suddenly you'll get different data. Now, can you interpret what a culture's doing? If you see, you know, a culture. If we looked at the culture and again in some you know, Amazonian jungle, could we make sense of it? Would we understand it? What if we looked into some small village in, you know, China someplace? Would we understand what was going on there? So you have these problems. You're going to get information, but you have to interpret it, and you have to lead the query. Usually there's a whole series of queries, you see, as you broaden your scope. So it's not just a matter of, I'd like to know about that. You see, that's a very general. Know about what? What in particular? You're querying a database. You see, you can't just say, I'd like to know about what was going on then. What do you mean, going on? You see, how general is going on? Well, if you say those sorts of things with your intent, you'll just get, you know, it's like going, like my example often is, it's like going to Google and typing in the word love. You know, you'll get 6 million replies, and most of them will be of no value to you. It's the same thing if your intent is, I'd like to see what was going on there, because going on there just is too general a sense. So you need to be specific. Then your intent needs to be like an investigator. You need to explore. Well, I've seen a little bit here. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about this. Who did that, and why were they doing this? And if you ask why were they doing this, you may not get a picture. Often you don't get pictures of why is this being done. Now you'll just get information. It won't be text, but it'll just be downloaded information. All things that you ask for aren't necessarily good for, you know, to be given to you in pictures. So it's a mixed media, if you will, and you have to be able to be open to all of that. Now, so that's one thing. It's just the querying itself is an art that you have to practice and get good at so you can be specific enough to get valuable data, but yet then generalize those specifics slowly as you explore that environment. So there is some art to querying the database. So that's one thing. It's not just necessarily a trivial thing to do. It takes experience. You have to work at this. Now the second thing is, if you just do this out of the clear blue sky, if you say, oh, I'm an archaeologist, I'd like to, you'll get some data back, and the next thing you'll say is, well, did I just make that up? I can't rely on that. There's no credibility there, right? Okay, I did get this scene, and I could see stuff that was going on, and perhaps that's plausible, but maybe this is coming out of my own head of what I imagine it might be like. That's not objective history. I can't rely on that. I can't write papers based on that sort of thing. Well, that's probably true. I wouldn't argue with those statements at all. So the second thing that takes time is that you have to develop the skill slowly and corroborate it with facts. You have to develop your ability to access data from these databases and check the data that you get against facts that you know from another source, which means you're going to spend some years learning to access data that you can then check on. What happened 10,000 years ago, you can't check on. There aren't any records from 10,000 years ago. That is impossible to check, but you can do things that happened 5 years ago, or that happened yesterday, or that happened today at some place that you are not. Now we're in a place that's called remote viewing. Well, remote viewing is nothing more than accessing the database. It's just another way of accessing the database. Let me see what such and such coordinates, what's going on at that place, or I'd like to see what's happening, in my parents' house at, this morning, that kind of thing. Well, it's just getting data out of the database. All that's in the database. So it's just queries, and it's usually specific queries. So remote viewing and collecting data out of the database are a very similar thing. Oh, I'd like to see whether or not somebody is ill or healthy or what's wrong with them physically. It's just getting data out of the database. All of these things are just different kinds of queries. I'd like to see, the person who originally bought this ring or had this ring made for them, or the stones that get put up in the Stonehenge. I'd like to see the process of the stones being put in, this sort of thing. Then it's all just data from the database. But if you start with meditation, because you cannot get clear data back unless you have a clear, open mind and a clear intent. Most of us don't have clear, open minds. And those are two different things, clear and open. One, it has to be open enough that you just let the information in without operating on it, without judging it, without making it make sense to you. Because when you put this filter on it, it says, well, this data didn't make sense, so I'll kind of rearrange it a little way to make it make sense. Then you are meddling with the data, and it's not data anymore. Now it's your expectations are changing the data. So first you have to be able to achieve a mental state where you have no expectations, where you have no fear, where you have no ego. You have to transcend all of that, and having no ego is very problematic for most people because they're full of ego. Ego is how they operate in this world. It's just normal for people to have lots of fear and lots of ego. So now we have a front-end problem that you have to get rid of this ego, fear, get to a state where your mind is clear of all those things and open. And that takes a lot of practice. Okay. Then, once you do that, second step is to practice evidential things with things that you can check on until you understand just exactly how you do it and how does it work and how clear does the state have to be and how open and how do you get the data and how do you translate it so that it's right, so that you can get evidence, you can see things that you can check on. And once you do that, you build up confidence. You say, oh, every time I do it this way, and now that I've reached this level of my development where I've got my ego down and I can get this clear mind, if I do it this way, then I get the right answers. Well, with experience, you gain confidence that when you do that, you get right data. You are accessing data, and you're accessing it, accurately. Now, when you access something that's 100,000 years old, where there's not going to be any written records, obviously. It's now archaeologists guessing from the little bit of clues that they dig up out of the ground, and an archaeologist, if you'd like to see more of it, if you've done all these other steps, you can do that and get that information. Being the archaeologist, what you see will mean more to you. And if you have developed confidence and trust in your results through experimentation, then you can rely on that data and say, yeah, I'm getting this information and I trust it. But the trust has to be built up. If you just one day say, well, I'll try that. Oh yeah, I see this, but there's no trust. And there shouldn't be any trust. You haven't yet learned to have focused intent, to have no expectations, to get your own mind and thoughts and fears and stuff out of the way. There's a lot of processing you haven't learned yet. So it probably is just out of your imagination until you learn for it not to be. So in a way, you see, it sounds like it's very difficult. Well, it's not so difficult. All these things that I've been telling about that you have to do is learning how to stop messing it up, how to stop interfering with it. So it's getting rid of the fear. It's getting rid of things. It's not like, well, you have to learn this special new way of doing things. Here's the recipe that you can do this. That's not it. You have to change yourself. And that's the hard part of the process, is to get rid of all the things that block your ability to do it, because you're consciousness. As consciousness, you have an ability to query these databases, to get this information anytime you want, any way you want, and it's an open system. So it's like you have all the, doing it is easy. Getting rid of all the things that keep you from doing it, all of these things we've just been talking about, lack of experience, fear, beliefs, all this stuff, getting rid of all that junk, that's the hard part. So that's why I say, gee, it's really an easy thing to do, but, you have to prepare yourself to be able to do it. Then you have to experiment so that you build up confidence in that you're doing it well and that your answers are good, and then you're ready to make some use of it as an archaeologist or some other profession. So that's kind of it's very easy to do, but it's very hard to get yourself ready to where it's easy to do.
I think this is a very good point. I'm glad you brought back the fact that as consciousness we have the natural innate ability to do this. This isn't a gift for just some. It is, certain people do have more gifts, but I think this might be a good place to bring in the double slit experiment, because in some of the workshops I've heard a comment, well, what does this double slit experiment mean to me? This is physics. I don't think this is going to be of any interest or importance to me or relevance to me. But when you present that, as we did at the Unity presentation in Atlanta, it's very important for people to get that, because knowing the significance of the double slit experiment shows us that this reality is not objective, it is subjective, and it therefore points to consciousness as the means by which you interpret a reality subjectively. And this information that you tap into is can be a result of that. It's disciplined. You need, as you say, the scientific protocol in order to improve on that. But it is accessible to everyone with the work. You have said that mysticism, will be the new science. This isn't out there mysticism. This is science. This is something that, if they understand the double slit experiment, then everything falls into place. This is why I brought out the subject that seems as though it's just a mystical experience. I have a friend who went into the Lascaux caves in France, and he was so moved by the paintings that he saw. This was many years back when you could see the actual paintings. So moved and had such a focused intent, he wanted to know who would have painted this. Who is the person who painted this? And there it was, right in front of him. There was a man. He could see the color of the skin and the things that he was wearing, and there was the person that was painting. Mm-hmm. And this is an ordinary person who, previous to this, didn't have any kind of experience like that. It was simply that this particular thing was so important to him that he left everything. He let everything go.
He was able to focus his intent.
He was able to focus it very clearly. Mm-hmm. So this, what you're describing, I want to make the point, is very accessible to everyone, and in many different fields. I think we're going to carry on with other subjects in the same idea or the same theme, such as music and art and writing. I'd like to know what your ideas are about that and how it can apply to everyone, whatever their interest or their profession is, how it can be of help to them.
Okay. When you mentioned the mysticism, I think what I was saying was that what is mystical is relative. It depends on the person asking the question. If we had some of those indigenous pygmies out of the Amazon and presented them with a computer or a color television, they may find that very mystical. From their point of view, that would be, a very mystical box with people in it talking, and people weren't really there. It would be a mystical experience. Well, it's not really mystical to us because we understand how to build those kinds of things. We understand the science behind it. But what is mystical has to do with the perception of the asker. And many of the things that today, in the year 2012, what seemed to be mystical may well be science at another time. And it's always been that way through history. Most of the things that were spirits and gods and whatever that did this or do that, the weather, right? That was all about what the spirits and the gods were doing, and Zeus with his lightning bolts and so on. Well, now we find out that there's patterns to it, and there's reasons for it doing what it does and how it does it. So things that we think are mystical turn out, and things that we think are kind of useless home remedies sometimes turn out to be actual very good medicine once we understand how they work. That's true too. So the things that we don't know, that most of us blow off as nonsense, may one day turn up as science. And that was the kind of the context of what I was saying there, is that what we call the paranormal, what we call getting this information out of the database, what we call how can you heal with your mind, the placebo effect. These things are all mystical, even though placebo effect is a part of our science. We have the double slit experiment. That's mystical. Scientists don't know why that works, you see. Well, traditional scientists don't know we know why that works, but they don't. The entanglement is another physics problem that's mystical. If somebody tries to explain how these two things on opposite ends of the universe instantaneously change, one changes when you change the other, well, we can't explain that objectively. And things that you cannot explain objectively are called paranormal, means beyond normal. And in our world, objective is normal. We live in an objective reality, and that's our normal reality. So things like the placebo effect and the double slit experiment and the entanglement of spin pairs, then these things are not objective, and therefore they're paranormal. Well, so are precognitive dreams, so are, your friend's experience at the cave, seeing that person doing the painting. And we don't pay much attention to those things because they're not objective. But yet, with care, as I've just explained, and with practice, and with learning to do this in a way that you build confidence that what you're getting is the right information because you're going about it in the right way, then it's as solid information as any other information that you might get. It's not mystical anymore. It wasn't a mystical experience, but it was just somebody withdrawing data from a database. No more than Googling something is a mystical experience, right? It's the same sort of thing. You can go into Google and Google something, and out comes a bunch of data, some of which might be useful, and that's not a mystical experience. We understand that. Well, this is the same way. We live in a virtual reality. It's based on information. The information's in the database, and you can access it. There's no mysticism involved. It just appears that way to people who don't understand the nature of reality, who have never gotten rid of their fear and ego and arrogance and that sort of thing, which blocks all this stuff. They've never practiced and experimented and explored until they got good at doing this and getting right answers. And then, you see, so it seems mystical to somebody who's not prepared to understand it in a more fundamental way. So there's a lot that we see as mystical, that it's just our ignorance that makes it mystical to us. And we tend to put down people who understand things that we don't, because we figure if we don't understand it, then nobody could. So if we don't understand it, then we figure everybody who thinks that way must be foolish. It's just a kind of a typical arrogance and ego position that most of us take.